Hey guys, welcome back to the Speaker's Edge podcast, the podcast dedicated to help you to learn from some of the world's very best speakers and communicators so you can learn to master your message and inspire your audience every single time you speak. I'm your host for this podcast, Roddy Galbraith. I'm delighted you've chosen to join us in this series, the first of a series of different episodes where we're talking about executive presence. How do you develop your executive presence? How do you develop your poise, your gravitas in front of maybe one or two people at work, or maybe think of it as stage presence when you're on stage in front of a large group of people? How do you improve the way that you're perceived by others? How do you change the way that people feel when they're around you? That's what we're going to look at. We'll start today with probably one of the most important places that we can start. We'll start with the power of a first impression, and then perhaps in the next episode we'll come on to the next piece of this. But before we get to that, if you haven't downloaded the companion resources yet, you can go to maxwellleadership.com/speakers edge, download those resources, and if you enjoy this episode, we'd love it if you rate and review as well the episode. That would be great. Thanks very much. All right then, so let's talk about developing executive presence, and let's start with the importance of the first impression, the power of the first impression. You've all heard that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Well, that is largely true. I think sometimes you do get a second chance, or at least you get the opportunity to upgrade it or override that initial impression. But it takes a great deal more energy than it does to form the first impression in the first place. So if you can get the first impression working for you, then it makes an enormous difference. So if we think about executive presence, and some of you thinking about executive presence, you're probably thinking, well, I'd like to have executive presence, but to be honest, I'm probably closer to the imposter syndrome than the executive presence. I'm probably at the other end of the spectrum. And I think that's fairly normal for a lot of people. They look at some people who seem to be very confident, they seem to be very comfortable in their own skin, and they think, I'd like to be like that, but I don't feel like that. To me, I feel like, who am I to stand up and speak to the board? Who am I to speak to these people? Who am I to be interviewed by this wonderful company? And some people have a lot of imposter syndrome. Well, I think imposter syndrome really is it's just showing us that there's a growth area, and I think we want to lean into imposter syndrome. We want to lean into it so that we can continue to grow, and we can outgrow those feelings, and we can grow into better feelings. So we'll come back to imposter syndrome on another episode. I just want to acknowledge that a lot of people, when we're talking about executive presence, may well feel like they're starting there. We can outgrow those feelings, and we can grow into feelings of confidence. We can grow into feelings of being very comfortable in our own skin. We can grow into feelings of supreme confidence. We can grow into feelings of being bulletproof in the delivery in front of the audience, if that's what we want to do. But we grow into those things. We don't just decide that we're going to have them and we have them immediately. We're not pretending. It's not a perception change. We actually have to grow into them. And growth is something that we can't really shortcut. No one can do it for us. We have to actually grow. We need to go through the process of growth. So when we're talking about developing executive presence, I like to look at it in two different ways. One is, what are some of the things that everyone can do that are going to give you like a hack, if you like, or a shortcut? How can you immediately change the way you're perceived by the people or the person that you're speaking to? So that's what we're looking at, part one of this, with the power of the first impression. But then also, how can you grow so that you'll continue feeling more and more at home in front of any audience, whoever it is that you're speaking to? So there's some shortcuts that we can take, and there's some we can't. The ones that we can take, we're going to look at those. The ones that we can't take, really about growth, and we're going to talk about how we can grow into those. Before we get to that though, let's just spend a moment thinking about, what is executive presence? What words might come to mind if you think about executive presence? I bet gravitas is one, isn't it? You have to have gravitas, you have to have poise, you have to have influence, you need to be able to connect with the people or the person that you're speaking to. You need courageous leadership, you need charisma, confidence, character, lots of C's, credible, competent, composure. Are there any others? Clarity. You need clarity about what you're speaking on, probably some more as well. So you need to be very dependable, you need to have insight, you need perhaps to be a good listener, you need to have empathy with the person that you're speaking to. There's lots of words that we could come up with, and then many more as well the more we thought about it. Being trustworthy, being very direct or authoritative, appropriately assertive, all of these things, having certainty, all of these things. And the more you think about it, the more different words probably you'll come up with that go into this. Yeah, that's what I mean by executive presence. Well, it's a lot for us to go through if we think about all of those different things. So I like to break it down into manageable chunks And in my mind, what we really want to focus on is two things if we're talking about executive presence. How are you perceived by others? How are you perceived by others? And then how do they feel around you? How do they feel around you? How do they feel about themselves? How do they feel about you? How do they feel about life? How do they feel about the other people around them? All of those types of things. So if we could work on those, if we could improve the way we're perceived and we can improve the way that people feel around us, then that's going to change our presence, if you like, isn't it? And this is very achievable. This is something that we can easily focus on. So the first area, as I said, we're going to look at is the power of the first impression. If we can make a strong first impression, it's going to carry us. And if we make a weak first impression or we really bomb, it's going to drag us down. It's going to sink us. And I do think it's possible to overcome a first impression, but it takes a great deal more effort than it took to make the impression in the first place. So we want to try and get it working for us if we possibly can. Now, whether we like it or not, the truth is, for you and me and everyone else, we're very judgy. We're very judgy. We make judgments about people very, very quickly. In fact, we make snap judgments in fraction of a second sometimes, certainly in the first few seconds, certainly less than 10 seconds. A lot of the research says 4 seconds, 5 seconds, we reach snap judgments about people. Well, snap judgments about what, you're probably thinking? What sort of judgments do we make about people when we first see them? Well, status. We guess people's status. We make a snap judgment. We jump to an opinion. And there's very little evidence for us to do that if we're doing it in seconds, if you think about it. If we're making a snap judgment about how intelligent somebody is in the first 4 or 5 seconds of meeting them, which is what the research suggests we do, then it's not objective. It's not exhaustive. It's a snap judgment, which we then are convinced by. And then that kind of governs our perception of them and the way we interact with them. We can't possibly know how intelligent they are. We just make a guess and then we stick with that. So that's one of the snap judgments. So status, how intelligent somebody is, how successful they are. Just think about that. We decide how successful somebody is. So that really is, like, we really are judging a book by its cover, aren't we? Or at least we can tell how much it costs when we're looking at that. So status, intelligence, success, how much income a person makes, we make decisions about that. Again, how can we possibly know? Well, we make a snap judgment about how much money people make. We make judgments about how trustworthy people are in the first few seconds. In fact, even quicker than that for trustworthiness. How dominant they're likely to be, so we can decide how we're going to interact with them. How charismatic they are, we decide that very quickly. How kind somebody is, how attractive they are. How promiscuous, apparently, the research shows, this is not my list, this is the research. How attractive, how promiscuous, how adventurous, and how dateable are all things that we reach snap judgments on when we meet people for the first time, very, very quickly. Now, if you look at trustworthiness as an example, this is the one that I like to think about, because I read in some of the research that we reach a decision about how trustworthy people are in 1/10 of a second. And my mind immediately says, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. How can they possibly know that anyway? How can they possibly know that we reach a decision about how trustworthy somebody is in 1/10 of a second? So I looked into it in more detail, and again, there's plenty of research. If you're interested in this, you can find all kinds of research on this. And it's very simple, actually. Very simple the way that they do it. They take two groups of people, Group A and Group B, and they show both groups the same photos or the same videos of people, and both groups need to decide how trustworthy the person in the video is, or the person in the pictures are. And so they decide, yes, they're this trustworthy or they're this trustworthy. But Group A only has 1/10 of a second to see the photos. So they need to decide based on very limited information. 1/10 of a second, then they choose. Whereas Group B has all the time they need. They have all the time they need to decide how trustworthy the person in the picture is. Now, you know what they find? Yeah, exactly. They're about the same. They're pretty much the same. Whether you have 1/10 of a second or you have all the time you need, you reach pretty much the same conclusion. Isn't that interesting? Well, it's even more interesting because they ask one other question at the same time. How confident are you in your answer? And the result doesn't change the more time you have, but the degree of confidence in your answer goes up the more time you have to look at the pictures. Just think about that. The result doesn't change. That means that both groups are making up their mind in 1/10 of a second because it's the same, and it doesn't change the more time you have. But if you have more time, you're more confident in your answer. So you're looking at the pictures for longer or the videos for longer, and you're saying, yep, absolutely. That's definitely it. I'm right about that. I'm feeling very confident about this. So you must be sniffing out more information for the decision you've already made. This is huge when you think about it, because it means that we make up our mind very quickly. We reach these snap judgments, we make up our mind, and then we look for the evidence to support the decision that we've already made. It's huge, isn't it? We make up our mind and we look for the evidence to support that. Now, you've probably met some people where immediately you think, oh no, this guy's an idiot. This guy's an idiot. Some of you might have thought that when you started listening to this episode. Who is this guy? He's an idiot. If you reach a snap judgment like that, then you're going to look for the evidence to support it. And you're almost certainly going to find plenty of evidence to support the decision you've already made, because your marvelous mind will sniff it out and it will change your perception and make you think about it differently. And so you'll find evidence to support that snap judgment that you've already made. If you think somebody's competent, if you think somebody's very good, very bright, very influential, then you'll find the evidence to support that. In either case, there's plenty of evidence for both. But you find the evidence to support the snap judgment that you've already made. Fascinating, right? Well, imagine we're now in an interview scenario. So you're going into a building and you're going for an interview, and the interviewer is in the room, and whoever's shown you up to the room has said, go ahead and go on in. So I'm going to just count 5 seconds here, right? And we'll see how long that actually is in this scenario. So we say go, right? So you open the door, you see them across the room, you walk over, you approach them, you hold out your hand, you just about touch it, and that's it. That's 5 seconds. So basically, they saw you walk across the room if they were paying attention, and by the time you're about to shake hands and say, hi, my name's Roddy, I'm here for the interview, they've already made up their mind, apparently. But before the interview's even started. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? How does that play out? Well, apparently they've made decisions about your status, intelligence, success, income, trustworthiness, dominance, charisma, how kind you are, attractive, promiscuous, adventurous, and dateable. Hopefully none of those are relevant in this particular interview. I suppose it depends what you're interviewing for, but let's assume that we're not thinking about those things, but all of the other things they've made a decision about in a fraction of a second. 5 seconds, that's all it was. And some of these have been decided very quickly, some of them longer, but within, seconds, a lot of these things have been decided. And you think, well, how can that be? Surely there's going to be an interview where they're going to ask me about my job history, they're going to ask me about my resume, they're going to ask me about all of these things. They're going to ask me about tough interview challenges, tough leadership challenges. What's the most difficult problem you've faced at work? What are you most proud of outside of work? Tell me about yourself. All of those things that we've prepared for in going for this interview. Are they going to ask us those things? Yeah. But if what we've just looked at up until now is accurate or even vaguely accurate, which the research again suggests that it is, then they're going to look for evidence to support decisions they've already made in those key areas. Isn't that interesting? I find this fascinating. I find it fascinating. So wouldn't it be useful then, if that's true, and again, the research seems to suggest that it is, wouldn't it be useful to know on what basis we're going to reach those snap judgments? Of course it would. Well, it's things like, how well groomed are you? Have you washed your hands? Have you cut your fingernails? Have you brushed your hair, polished your head? Are you well turned out? Are you looking your best? You can't be the best looking, but you can look the best you possibly can. So are you well groomed? Are you well dressed? Are you well dressed? Relevant to the occasion, of course. For the occasion, are you well dressed? Do your clothes fit? These are things that we can take in a fraction of a second unconsciously, aren't they? Are you on time? That's huge. Are you on time? Are you a good listener? Are you actively listening? Are you leaning in as you're listening? Do you have a warm smile? Are you making eye contact in an appropriate way? Not freaking them out. Is your tone of voice appropriate for what you're talking about? Are you using your voice? Are you moving confidently? As you walked into the room, how did you move? How did you walk? Was it confident? Are you standing up and looking the world in the eye? Are you mirroring their body language if you're sitting down or standing with them in an appropriate way? Again, are you making the odd sincere compliment if there's time? All of these things go into making that first impression. And 85% of the 12 different things that I've mentioned 85% of them are visual. Now, this is good news because it means anyone can work on that first impression if it's visual. You can look at the way you're turned out. You can up level, you can improve. You can make sure that your clothes fit, that you're well dressed. You can make sure you're on time. You can make sure you're attentive and you're smiling and making eye contact. You can work on your tone of voice. You can work on moving confidently. You could video yourself moving through a room and you could see how you come across to other people. All of these things are things that's easy for you to work on once you know how important they are. So we form opinions very, very quickly when we meet people. In fact, we make snap judgment in seconds, and then we look for the evidence to support the decisions that we've already made, to support the judgments that we've already made. So we've got to try and get that first impression on our side. So one way that you can work on this is to study yourself. Study yourself. And I found when I started speaking and started seeing myself on video a great deal, I realized that I look miserable a great deal of the time. And I'd never thought of it before. But then when I thought about it, I realized that my whole life people have said to me, "What's wrong with you?" And I'd say, "Well, there's nothing wrong with me." They said, "Well, why are you so miserable?" I say, "I'm not miserable." They said, "Well, you look miserable." I said, "I'm not miserable, I'm happy." "Well, tell your face, because your face does not look happy, it looks miserable." And I realized that that's my responsibility. And when I say I realized eventually, like fairly recently. Fairly recently, I realized it's my responsibility. I can take control of the way I appear to other people. If I know when I'm not smiling that I look miserable, then I'm free to try and do something about it if I choose. So video yourself and study yourself. Watch it back and see how you come across to other people. This is something that is well within your ability to do something about. You can change the way you're perceived by others by understanding yourself what they see when you walk into the room, when you interact with them. So video is such a great tool. Imagine years ago, people didn't have video. They just had to look in the mirror to get that. But you can video yourself in all kinds of different interactions. And if you're interested in developing your speaking, I highly recommend that you video yourself and watch it back. And you'll find that you get better and better and better. But not just speaking, sports. You know, video in sports is huge these days, isn't it? If you're a golfer or a tennis player. I remember 2016, we went to Necker Island, Richard Branson's island in the British Virgin Islands. We stayed there for a couple of weeks, and every morning I had tennis lessons with the tennis pro who lives on the island that Richard played with twice a day, every day. It still does. We went back recently, and it's a different tennis pro. In fact, 2 different tennis pros this time, but Richard plays every day when he's there. Most of the time, he's playing tennis. That's how he keeps fit. Well, they just bought this fancy machine. And Josh, who was the tennis pro at the time, he said, "Look, you've got to see this machine. It's amazing." And because they had cameras in the corners of the court, and it would watch you while you're playing, and he would serve a number of shots towards me, and we'd hit maybe 20 or 30 balls, and then he'd say, "Okay, let's go take a look at the screen." And then we'd look, and you could select all the shots that I missed, and then it would replay them, and you could see, right, white, pause. See, the racket is too close to your body. You're getting too close to the ball, and they're the ones that you're hitting out. So it's very easy when you see it to see the problem, but much more difficult if you can't see yourself. And so it was amazing to go through all of the ones that I hit in and what I did, and then to see all of the ones that I hit out and what I did, and then for him to tell me what I was doing right or wrong, and for me to see it and say, "Oh yeah, I see now." I'm modeling it for myself, so I can see what works and what doesn't, and I can try and do more of what works less of what doesn't. So it was amazing, actually. Unfortunately, there was a big hurricane a few years after that wiped out much of the island, and it had to be rebuilt, and that machine was one of the things that went. So when we went back, it wasn't there anymore. But it was great, and it was a great illustration of how useful it is to see yourself. So when you're speaking, video yourself and watch it back. It's a great way to learn. It really is. All right, so we'll leave executive presence there for this week with the first impression. We'll come back to this, I think, next week when we'll talk about body language, because a first impression is how you can make instant progress and instantly change the way that you're perceived by people. Body language as well. There's some aspects of body language you need to work on, and there's some aspects of body language that are going to help you make an immediate first impression. If you can get your stance right, if you can get your hands right, if you can get your head position right, if you can stand presidentially, then you'll be perceived presidentially. And this is something that people will see you as and perceive you as, whether you feel like it or not. If it looks like you belong, then they'll assume that you belong, even if you don't feel like you belong. So this is why it's like one of those genuine hacks, if you can get some of the body language things right. So we'll talk about that next week. There is some that are going to take longer for you to really master. We'll talk about those as well. So every week on the show, I talk about the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. And if you're interested in developing your speaking, if you're interested in being a better communicator, I really do think it's a no-brainer. But it's more than that. It's about being if you want to develop as a coach, a speaker, a trainer, develop your leadership, develop your career. It's all of those things. But for me, because my responsibility on the team is communication and speaking, I always say if you're interested in developing your speaking, it's a no-brainer. I've been working with John on the Maxwell method of speaking for years now, since 2010 really. So many years, 15, 16 years, and I think it's one of the best systems of speaking anywhere in the world. There's 60,000 coaches around the world, there or thereabouts, in 168 countries around the world. You wouldn't be the first person to go through the program if you decided to join, but just check it out. Go to maxwellleadership.com/speak. You can jump on a call with a program advisor, find out, and see if it's a fit for you. All right, so that's it for this week. Don't forget to download the companion resources, as I said at the beginning. Just go to maxwellleadership.com/the Speaker's Edge. You download those resources. We'd love it if you rate and review the show, as I said at the beginning. And remember, communication is a learnable skill, and it's one of the most important skills that you can develop. So it's great that it's a learnable skill, and I think it's well worth your effort, your energy to develop it. So keep learning, keep developing, and you really will learn to master your message and inspire your audience every time you speak. That's it. Thanks for listening today. I'll see you next week with the next episode. Lots of love. Bye-bye. God bless.